Hey, greetings. This is Fred in Alaska. Thanks for joining me today. It's been a lot of work getting caught up in the background with a lot of things, reconnecting with people. And I wanted to start off by saying, you know, it's really important, like I've shared before, but love your people, whether it be a wife of almost 20 years or your kids that you don't see that often. Your people. Yeah, I mean, you could pick your friends, you can't pick your family, but love your people, man. That's key, because tomorrow ain't promised. And the way the world looks is just crazy. You know, even outside of the crazy wilderness of Alaska and what goes on around here. But sorry, I got a audience member over here staring at me. Lay down, Tank. So what I wanted to share with you today comes from Brian and Casey. Now, Brian and Casey, they decided they were going to team up, and Brian has a pilot's license. Casey was gifted through his dad a Piper Cub, and so they, being buddies and stuff, they figured, well, hey, let's go in together, get the plane back up to running, and you know, basically partake in a partnership, flying out, doing trapping, and, you know, get the fur bearers and make some money, you know, see what they could do about it, right? And this was roughly 20 years ago. So, we're going back to, 06, 07, wintertime, about this time of year, because fur-bearing animals, you get them in the wintertime because that's when their coat's thickest and most lush. So, Brian and Casey, they're going out into the Chugiak range, right? And they didn't want the exact place because it varies. They'll land in a spot. They'll put a set out. They'll line up a few different sets for like pine, marten, wolverine, that what have you. So they're kind of bouncing around and doing their thing. Well, as Brian was in the back seat and Casey was flying this one particular trip, Casey was just basically, he didn't have as many flight hours as Brian, so Casey was taking his time and kind of feeling out the plane and doing just little maneuvers, nothing major, right? And on one of his hard turns he was making, with enough altitude of course, but he was making this turn to the right, and it just so happens that Brian looks down, and it's an open kind of area. There's some open marsh areas in between the spruce trees and the birch and the aspen. And as he's circling around in this valley, Brian, when he looks down, he notices a tree he thought was a tree that looked out of place, right? The coloring was different. It just stood out. It was damn near right in the middle of this meadow, this open area, which initially from the air it didn't look like a very large area, but once they came down from altitude, it was obviously a lot wider open place. But so Brian gets Casey's attention. Hey, look at there, and Casey was just focusing on his maneuver and wasn't necessarily paying attention to Brian, because obviously, his gauges and everything, he wasn't crashing, so he didn't know wasn't really paying attention to Brian. Well, Brian gets his attention and Casey sees what he sees. And so they decide, well, hey, you know what we're going to do? We'll zip back around. We'll kind of do the figure 8 turn, come back in low, and let's land. Well, Brian was initially with it, right? He was like, yeah, we'll land. We'll see what is that? Because it wasn't moving. It was just out of place. It was a brownish, reddish, rusty kind of color looking. And they're like, must be a tree stump of some kind, but it's so out of place. So they circle back around, and as they're coming down and they're getting, lined up to land into the wind, they notice, because they still have some altitude at this point, a few hundred feet, and this thing bolts, takes off from directly in front of them, off to the right, hits the tree line, and yeah, I mean, it was fast, and immediately it startled Casey, and so he powers back up because he was just getting ready to slip, and slow down his airspeed to get ready for a landing. And so he powers back up, they circle around, and when they get back up to an altitude and circle back, Brian's looking, he's got binoculars out, he's trying to really look, and Casey's kind of shaking. He's like, what the hell was that? It ran so fast. Couldn't really figure it out because it was gone, disappeared in the trees. They didn't know what the hell to do, so they just decided, you know what, screw this, let's carry on. They continue on to the next spot, is multiple miles away, and when they get to the spot where they had some sets, they land and they taxi to where they want to take off from. They get out, put on their snowshoes, and they just trek in with a small caliber rifle, and they get over to where the sets start, and each and every one, they're decently spread apart, but they were all in a line across this tree line, running along one side of this valley. And each and every one of the sets looked like it was either tripped, or if there had been something in it, there was only a little bit of fur left in the trap, or the trap was just missing, right? And they're like, what the hell? And it's taken them a while, because again, they're in snowshoes, it's deep snow. It was 20 years ago, we're still getting really decent snowfalls. We still do, unless they're playing with heart, but anyway, regardless. So as they're walking the tree line, Casey has a survival rifle, which is like a 410-22 combo, single shot of each, right? And Brian happens to have a 12 gauge, a Marine style break open single shot. And Brian always brings slugs and birdshot and that type of thing, right? So he has, a different kind of variety of slugs and what have you, ammo in his pouch. And they're walking along, and since they landed, it's been about 45 minutes, right? And because they're stopping, they're looking at each and every individual, whether the trap was sprung and nothing was there, or is just outright missing. They're kind of trying to piece together what the hell's going on. Did someone else fly in? Is someone stealing our traps? Yeah, they're kind of brainstorming back and forth. Well, they get almost to the end of this particular line, right? And as they're getting close to the end of it, they had a set for a wolverine, right? And they go over and they could see some fur, from the trap and whatnot. So like, oh, hey, we have something, right? So Casey, being in the lead by just a couple paces, tromps over there in his snowshoes, and when he gets over there, he immediately stops, and he's reaching out with the barrel of this survival rifle, poking at it, right? And all it turned out to be was this tuft of hair, but it was sticking out of the snow. So from the distance they were initially at, it gave the illusion that there was something trapped there, right? And so when Brian comes up beside him, he's like, what the hell? And so he goes over and he figured it was like dead lichen off of a pine tree or a spruce tree or whatever, because it can get black and look like an old man's beard, or whatever. So he goes over and takes a look, and it's this weird hair, and it has a weird smell to it. Like for the amount of hair, it wasn't a whole lot, but it was enough, and the smell on the hair was pungent, And so as they're discussing what the hell, we don't have skunks up here, and it kind of smells like, like a body odor, urine kind of smell. In the distance, okay, same direction they'd been walking, towards the end of that, far end of that valley, the plane's like behind them. They got multiple hundreds of yards to get back to where the plane is set up for takeoff, right? It's way back there, it's sitting there, and they hear this scream, right? And from what Casey said, the scream shook everything inside him, not just like physically, but like metaphorically. Like his whole well-being was shattered. He said that one scream, it took all the fight out of him. He immediately he dropped the rifle out of his hand. He was down on his knees shaking, and he was like trying to fight for words to say what the hell is that. Brian was like already sitting there taking the bird shot out of that break barrel single shot 12 gauge, and he's putting a slug in, and he's not looking at Casey, he's looking in the direction, right, where the scream came from, because their guesstimation, it was within a few hundred yards, straight down the tree line to where it kind of curves back towards the back end of this valley where they're, checking their sets. Well, Brian is sitting there and he's talking to Casey, but Casey at this time is not checked out, but he's just like, what the fuck? What the hell is that? He's kind of having his own conversation within himself and not hearing Brian. And Brian's trying to talk to him about, hey, that was weird. And Brian's asking him questions about what the hell could that be and this and that. And Casey's trying to pull himself together because, like I said, Casey, it hit him hard. Really hard to the core of his being. He was shook, which I get. Hey, man, I'm not knocking the guy whatsoever, man. I've heard that scream. I've felt that feeling. It's jarring to the system, to say the least. It can really take it out of you. So again, it just everyone reacts differently in those circumstances, and even Casey was like, when I asked him, well, how did it feel, and after he initially told me that it took the fight right out of him, and it was like he was grasping for understanding. He said that the feeling he got was the one of being watched and despised. And when I asked Brian, what'd you feel when you're standing there and he wasn't communicating back, but you were talking, what were you feeling? Because that's really important. I think everyone should know what these people were feeling in those moments, in their words, Brian felt the same way. He said he felt like he was hated, like he was just despised beyond anything else, right? And so Casey pulls himself together enough to stand back up on his feet. He grabs that survival rifle, and they're like, let's get back towards the plane, right? And they got about, a couple hours before it's going to get dark. But again, their plane is hundreds of yards the other direction, and they want to clear some ground, right? Because it's further to get to the plane than it is from where that noise was. So they're going right along the tree line. They're trying to follow their tracks back. Since Casey was kind of really having a really hard go of it, like emotionally speaking, it just hit him in his core like that. Brian said, you get going. I'm going to be behind you. I'm going to keep track. You just don't focus and zone me out. If I yell and scream something, you pay attention and answer me back or whatever. Don't get too far ahead. And so they're doing that. Casey's going along, and Brian, they get he said it was about 150 yards, because after the initial scream, it was just dead quiet. And so they got about 150 yards back towards the plane, and they still had a couple hundred yards to go at least. And the scream happened again. Now, the scream happened, Brian said he had just looked back over his shoulder, saw no movement, took a real long look, and then turned back, and as soon as he was facing the opposite direction, that scream happened again, right? But it was so much closer. He said it felt like whatever it was right off his shoulder. Freaked him out. He said he damn near jumped out of his snowshoes. He stumbled, fell over, and he's pointing the rifle back at the tree line. And again, single shot 12 gauge, but he had something, right? And he's pointing back at the tree line, and he said he's so freaked out. He's trying to focus, but all the trees and everything, it was very hard for him to pull himself together in that panic mode. That fight or flight was just so heavy for him. He felt like he should be running and not looking, but he knew it was close enough. He couldn't just turn his back, right? Brian said he worked his way up onto his knees and then got up on, he had lost one of his snowshoes because of trying to get up. Something had broke on one of them or whatever, and his right foot slipped out, right? By this time, Casey had already heard that too, and Casey wasn't all that far ahead of him, so Casey had turned around, stopped, and was pointing his rifle. Grant you, a little underpowered, but still, he was scanning the area too. And so Casey backtracks over to where Brian is. Brian's trying to stare at the tree line from where this second scream came from and get his foot into the snowshoe, because otherwise he's going to be sinking down to almost his hip, right? And you don't want to be doing that, not in that situation. So from what Brian said, as he's trying to focus on getting the snowshoe on, you know, he said there's a period of time where he wasn't feeling like himself, right? And so you know, Brian is sitting there. He's trying to stay focused on these trees, because the scream just came from there. And Casey had backtracked, right? And again, they weren't communicating very well, because they were both freaked out big time. So as Casey got closer, he finally got Brian's attention, because obviously he's freaking out. I mean, you know, what do you do with that kind of thing, you know? And so Casey gets his attention and says, hey, I'll keep an eye, go ahead and fix your snowshoe, but let's get going. So Brian sets down the shotgun and he's trying to fix this binding and whatnot for his snowshoe. And he said when he knelt down and he was just about getting it reclasped, whatever was going on with it, it was like a busted rivet or something, and he was just trying to kind of like MacGyver it out of there. And he said as he was working on that, he kept glancing up, because out of his peripheral vision, he started seeing something in the trees, and he starts yelling out. He grabs up that single shot shotgun and he points in that direction, and he's yelling at Casey, hey, over here. And Casey's like, I see it. I don't want to shoot. Brian understands. Brian didn't want to shoot. He had 12 gauge, far better than the 22 and the 410 combo that Casey had. So they're both just sitting there saying, well, what should we do? So what they end up doing, because they still have a few hundred yards to get back to the plane way down. I mean, they see it, but it's not like they're just a couple trots away from it. Casey's like, let's just go together, shoulder to shoulder, and just take our time and work our way back. And their tracks walking down the tree line were real close to the trees, but now they don't want to be so close to the trees, so they're breaking trail again, right? And it's taking time, and they're obviously, time is of the essence. They don't want to be there any longer than they have to be. So Brian is just chatting with Casey. They're trying to have a normal everyday conversation about the traps and, you know, the next place they stop and this and that. It makes it really hard to record in here, because I start getting anxious talking about the hairy man, and these clowns want to act like idiots. Lay down now. I don't want to hear nothing out of any of you. Good God. No, you're not. No, I'm busy. Get out of there. So they're trying to have a normal everyday conversation, and it's not working too well. It's just sporadic, random, and they both know that they're not making sense to either, you know, themselves or whatever, but it was irrelevant. They were trying to take their mind off of how panicked they felt. He said they made it about another 100 yards, and they could hear movement in the trees this whole time after he had stopped to bend down to fix his binding and everything on the shoe, and it still wasn't perfect, but he was able to make do, and he wasn't trying to stop. So as they're kind of just shoulder to shoulder and working their way backwards, which time consuming, deep snow, yeah, it's not a simple thing. It's not a simple process. He said they got about another 100 yards, and this grunt, this guttural, he said he felt it like through their whole bodies, right? And that stopped them in their tracks, and they both just instinctively raised their guns, and they both fired at the same time. It wasn't even it was like an autopilot thing, like an auto response. Right, wrong, or indifferent is irrelevant. That's what they felt in the moment, and that's what they did. So they both fire off shots, and the little survival rifle fires a bit differently than the single shot 12 gauge, right? But anyway, irregardless, they fire what they have. Bam, bam, bam. And there's thrashing and crashing, kind of moving away. But when they heard that, behind them towards the plane, off in the tree line, they heard something else crashing and bashing and moving, kind of circling back around, paralleling them, coming back from the direction of the plane inside the trees, coming back up this way in the direction the other noise was coming from, right? The direction it was moving. Immediately, they're already shaking, fumbling, trying to reload their firearms and everything like that. So they both kind of squat down and they're both watching and they're listening. And from what they said, because they're both next to each other, okay, but their perspectives are totally different, because Casey's a little more freaked out than Brian is. Brian's trying to keep level-headed, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions on Casey. This is his words. He was more freaked out. He wasn't as attuned to every finite, every little noise. He was just hearing everything in general, because he was like, could hear his heart beat in his ears, right? And from what Brian was saying is you could feel there was something very heavy moving, boom, 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 from that movement that was behind them towards the plane, and that was moving towards the crashing away from them. He said they stayed there quiet for a minute, and all of a sudden it was like just loud, like, and as soon as it was almost even with them and just a little bit past them, kind of going away from the direction of the plane, everything goes dead quiet. No sooner is dead quiet, and they're like, what do we do? Let's get moving. As soon as they say let's get moving, and they turn their attention to start moving again, another scream happens, right? Same direction that the sound stopped from the second one they heard from that was initially behind them. So this scream happens, and this scream was super high pitched. He said it was like, it wasn't the guttural, it was piercing, it was real sharp, and it made them both just kind of want to cover their ears, and it was hard to do holding the gun and trying to, they basically turn their heads and put one hand over their ears. And he said it carried on and on and on. It had to have been over 20 seconds. He said it was the craziest, loudest, most piercing sound, but it was a scream, and it was almost like a whistle at the same time. That came to an abrupt end, and their ears are ringing from that, right? Far worse, he said, than what they were from the gunshots. And in the cold and crisp air, when you shoot a gun, trust me, you beam, if you ain't got air protection in, it's snappy, it's real crisp. So they start moving again, because whatever in the hell is going on there, they want nothing to do with it. They're gonna get the hell out of there. And so they start going. They're reloaded and everything, but they're what they agreed to as they were walking is Brian told Casey, hey, let's not focus on that. We got some distance between the tree line. Let's make tracks and then look. Make tracks and then look. Let's not constantly try to keep our attention there, and let's focus more on getting away from here, right? And hey, great, let's do it. They get into that. They get this little rhythm going, and they roughly about, at this point, about less than 100 yards from the plane, and they've come away from the tree line more, heading out to where the plane is parked, right? And Brian is telling Casey, I'll do the pre-flight, you just get in the back seat or whatever, I'll jump in the front, I'll fire up, I'll do pre-flight and all that, and we'll get out of here, you just keep an eye out, right? And so they got their little game plan on what they're going to do when they get to the plane. Now, he said they were just at the point to where they're going to follow their tracks, okay, because their tracks kind of came and curved to the tree line. They reached a point where they're going to follow the curved tracks back out to where the plane is parked. Brian said when they got to that point, all of a sudden, there's this noise, and he said he still can't place it. He's never heard it before or since, but it was like a bellowing, wallowing kind of like pig grunt squeal. It was this weird noise, right? And it was all in of its own sound. I mean, he was kind of trying to pull from here and there to kind of explain what it sounded like, but it was just its own unique sound. Very short, very crisp, got their attention. They turn around, and at the tree line, which at this point is about 60 yards from them, roughly, they're looking, and in between these spruce trees, and there's some alders and stuff, and there's a couple smaller aspen and some poplars and whatnot. This thing is just walking, and it's looking right at them, but it's right behind the trees. And as it's walking, it's looking right over at them, and it's like it doesn't care what's in front of it. It's almost like it knows there's nothing in front of it, but the way it's walking, they can't tell, because they're focused on it looking at them, and it's moving. They both lift their guns, and Casey, he's more jumpy at this point than Brian is, right? Because he even, he stated himself, he just could not handle what he was seeing. It wasn't making any sense. They said it was really hard to make out any real facial features from that point, because it was in the tree line, it was a bit silhouetted, and it was just dark features, right? Real dark features. But Casey said he wanted that thing away from him, and he shot again with this little survival rifle, a 22 410, right? Shot both barrels and went and reloaded, and Brian's yelling, hey, whoa. This thing didn't flinch from those shots. It just kept moving, and it actually started getting a little faster, and it's moving down the tree line, so that it's like it's going away. And Brian's like, come on, we gotta go, get moving towards the plane now, get moving towards the plane. And at this point, Brian has out about 2 or 3 more shells he's holding on to, so he could fire, break it open, pop one in, shut it, fire again. He was ready to reload as fast as he could. He's backing up. His snowshoe finally has it, and it falls off completely, and he wasn't messing with it, right? He was just kind of peg-legging, just kind of like a hole punch, just punching through every couple steps, punching through, but he was keeping everything together in his own mind. Well, this movement from the one that they looked at, and Casey had, for whatever reason, shot at it, obviously didn't hit it. Was unfazed by that particular portion of what happened. Brian could no longer see it, because when he said when it was moving and looking at them, it had the feeling, the energy felt like it didn't give a flying rat's ass if they saw it or not. It's like its whole thing was like a dominance, like arrogant, like you're nothing kind of feel. And so he's doing his best to backtrack. At this point, Casey had gotten into the Piper Cub and saw that Brian had totally lost his one snowshoe, so he starts doing pre-flight. And he's yelling at Brian, I'm doing pre-flight, this, that, he's going through what he has to go through, because, the plane's been sitting there about an hour. It's cooled off, but, it's not totally cold. Anyway, so Casey's trying to do pre-flight, and Brian's backing up still, and Brian said he was only about not even 20 yards, mere feet from the plane, and he gets this overwhelming feeling of being sick, and he has to stop, and he starts puking. And he says initially he thought it was because of the shock, the reality of what was happening. It just caught up to him, and he started puking, and he was kind of down on one knee, and he's kind of got the rifle, the single shot 12 gauge, and using it as a brace to brace himself up as he's vomiting. And then he stops and was trying to catch his breath, and he's spitting and whatnot, getting the nastiness out of his mouth, and he looks back, and the one that was moving, there's still no sign of that one, but the back a little further away from them up that tree line, he saw this thing standing there. And he said the one standing like 3 times the distance from the one that was closer to them had to be twice the size of the one 3 times closer. It was like it was a marked difference. He said it was so much larger than the one they just saw that Casey had shot at for whatever reason, right? And he said he was in shock, but he said he noticed it was his body was kind of making this weird noise. And he said that noise, which he could barely hear it, he was feeling it, and it was making his guts contract, and that's what was making him vomit. That's his perception. That's what he felt and what he saw. Again, I wasn't there. I'm just going by what Brian told me. And so it made him start puking again. And when he starts puking this time, he's like, trying not to puke all over himself, but at the same time, he doesn't give a shit. And also, he's trying to keep focus on this big one. And as he starts puking for the second time, and he's trying to focus on both things and all this, he notices that it starts coming towards him. And he said when he says it was coming towards him, he said he noticed the snow flying, and this thing was making tracks, coming like a linebacker, just coming at him. And immediately he was in the middle of heaving, and he just raised a shotgun, pointed in that direction, boom, cracked the barrel open, let the empty shell spit out, popped in another one, clicked it up. And at this point, after the first shot, there was a bunch of snow in the air, but he couldn't see through it. It was like a snow screen, right? And then he heard crash, thrash, bang, bang, ksh. And so he sat there a second, started vomiting again. It was like an uncontrollable thing at that point. But he was still trying to focus on where he had just shot and where this thing in general was. The snow screen that kicked up from this thing moving towards him settled down, and it was still standing there, looking really, really upset. The crashing and banging was the other one, came running, I guess, along inside the tree line that he didn't even notice, up near it, right? And the smaller one, the crashing and banging he was hearing was, he couldn't tell what it was doing because it was kind of kicking up snow at the same time, but it was like not jumping from tree to tree. It wasn't in the trees, but it was jumping from like one tree, breaking a branch, jumping to another one, breaking a branch. It was like bouncing around within the trees, just tearing shit up, basically, right? And then starts this high-pitched scream again. And then that's when the bigger one turned and then kind of goes past it into the trees. And then Brian said at that point, he turned around. He felt confident enough because at this point, Casey's screaming, get over here, you know. And so he makes it to the plane. He kicks the one snowshoe off, leaves it there, doesn't give a shit. Gets in there, hands the 12 gauge to Casey, who's sitting in the back. He jumps in, fires up. Both doors are open because you got an upper door and a lower door on the Piper Cub, right? And, you know, Casey's telling him everything about the pre-check and pre-flight and all that kind of stuff, and he's just letting the engine warm up, right? Brian's focusing on the temperature gauge and, you know, that type of thing, and looking out. And by this point, the wind had changed, right? So they got wind at their tail. They got to taxi down a ways. Once it gets, you know, up to running temperature, they got to taxi down, turn into the wind, and then take off, right? And so it gets to a warm enough where Brian's okay with the, you know, the temp it's at to get the fuck out of there. So he starts taxiing down, and the doors are open. Okay, Casey's got the 12 gauge pointing out the doors, and Brian's telling him on comms, don't shoot the strut, because the Piper Cub, it's got the two struts for the wings. He said, don't shoot the strut. We don't want to be stuck here. Don't shoot the strut. Brian's like, or Casey's like, I'm not going to shoot the strut. And they taxi down, and when he turns and he's powering up for takeoff, you know, they're on skis and stuff, right? So it's taking momentum to get to friction and all that kind of stuff, right? So he's getting up to speed, and just as he lifts off and he's starting to gain altitude, that's when Casey starts yelling over the comms again, and Brian shuts the door. And Casey's screaming over the comms, it's out in the open, it's out in the open. And so Brian doesn't care. He's in the air. We're safe, right? That's his only give a shit. So he gains some altitude, and once he gains altitude, he circles back and comes back. And as he was doing his thing to gain altitude and all that, Casey was saying something, but he wasn't paying attention because he was just kind of in shock, you know, trying to, what the fuck? Gets turned around, and then Casey says again, did you hear what I said? And he goes, no, man, I'm freaking out, you know, like, give me a second, you know. And Casey goes, no, it came to where we were just parked, and it has your snowshoe, and it went back into the trees. And I mean, what do you do then? I don't know. Maybe it collects shit you know, from scared pilots or whoever else comes through there. I don't know. They didn't want to share the exact particular valley. They just said leave it at Chugiak Range and go look at the map. Chugiak Range is, there's a lot of valleys in there, so hey, you want to go look and go look. But I want to thank Brian and Casey for sharing that. It actually it split their friendship for this is 20 years ago. It split their friendship for a while, and Brian had saw the channel and watched a few of the videos and realized, oh, they're talking about real stuff. It's not just, you know, a bunch of AI garbage or whatever. But he reconnected with Casey, and it's just a good thing. They were able to come back together as buddies and not have that experience be a, you know, a separator, a divider between them anymore, because it had been for a while. Because every time they'd see each other, it was stressful because they would relive what they went through. I want to thank them sincerely. I want to thank you guys for joining me. It's Fred in Alaska, and plenty more to come. All right, we'll catch you guys on the next one.